Before this video ends, you're going to witness power flip in a way you've never seen in an American courtroom. So if you believe truth still has teeth, hit subscribe right now, because stories like this get buried fast, and what happens seconds after a black woman was slapped by cops in open court will change how you see justice forever. Now come with me. Cops slapped a black woman in court. Seconds later, she took the judge's seat, began on a rain-soaked Monday morning in Fulton County when the courthouse smelled like wet coats, burnt coffee, and quiet dread, and nobody watching. From the bailiff leaning too hard on his baton to the public defender already planning his lunch escape. Had any idea they were about to witness a moment that would ripple far beyond those beige walls, because the woman standing at the defense table, wrists cuffed but spine straight, wasn't just another defendant named Aaliyah Monroe. She was a storm waiting for permission to speak, and the charge on paper said, failure to comply, disorderly conduct. But the truth had started 3 nights earlier when Aaliyah, a civil rights attorney on leave, and a former federal judicial clerk whose name had been deliberately scrubbed from the arrest report, was pulled over in a neighborhood being aggressively cleaned up for redevelopment. And when she calmly asked why, she'd been stopped, a question that has never been illegal but has often been punished. The situation escalated fast, voices rising, hands gripping, body cameras mysteriously angling away. And by the time the cuffs snapped closed, the narrative was already written by someone who assumed she'd never get to hold the pen. And now here she was in court, hair pulled back, face bruised in places makeup couldn't fully hide, eyes steady as the judge, Harold Whitman, a man 10 months from retirement and 3 decades removed from remembering why he ever believed in the law, flipped through a thin file without really reading it, while 2 officers, Rourke and Jensen, stood smug and loose-limbed behind her like men confident the system would finish what they'd started. And when Aaliyah tried to speak, just to correct a detail, just to say she'd asked for a lawyer and been denied, Whitman sighed and warned her about outbursts. And something in the room tilted, because the word landed heavier on her than on anyone else. And when Officer Rourke leaned in and hissed for her to shut up, the bailiff pretended not to hear. And when she didn't comply fast enough, because dignity sometimes pauses before it bows, Rourke slapped her, open-handed, sharp, and loud, a sound that cracked through the courtroom like a dropped gavel. And for half a second, the entire room froze. That strange collective pause where everyone knows they've just crossed a line but isn't sure who will pay for it, and Aaliyah staggered but didn't fall, her eyes burning, not with tears but calculation, because what no one in that room knew, what Rourke couldn't imagine and Whitman had forgotten, was that Aaliyah Monroe had spent years preparing for moments exactly like this, not out of bitterness, but out of a meticulous understanding of how power hides. And as the judge began to bark about decorum and threatened contempt, Aaliyah spoke calmly, clearly, and for the record, requesting that the court acknowledge the assault that had just occurred in open session, and when Whitman dismissed it as necessary force, something ancient and patient shifted behind her expression, because 10 seconds later, everything changed, starting with the courtroom doors opening to admit a woman in a charcoal suit accompanied by 2 federal marshals, the kind of entrance that rearranges oxygen. And she announced herself as Deputy Counsel for Judicial Review, here under emergency authority, and handed Whitman a sealed order. And as he read, his face drained from pink to gray, because the order cited a sealed investigation triggered 72 hours earlier by a complaint Aaliyah herself had filed electronically before her arrest had even been fully processed, documenting a pattern of civil rights violations, falsified reports, and improper use of force by the very officers in the room, all tied to Whitman's courtroom through a web of rubber-stamped rulings and ignored motions. And as murmurs spread, the deputy counsel continued, stating that due to immediate ethical concerns and the need to preserve judicial integrity, Judge Whitman was being temporarily relieved of the bench effective immediately, and the words hadn't even finished echoing before the marshals gently but firmly guided him. That alone would have been enough for a lifetime story. But then came the twist that would turn this moment into legend, because the deputy counsel turned to Aaliyah, unlocked her cuffs herself, and addressed her not as defendant, but as Your Honor, explaining that under an obscure but very real provision allowing for emergency judicial substitution in active proceedings, one Aaliyah had helped research years earlier while clerking and had never forgotten. Aaliyah Monroe, already a confirmed and sworn judge whose appointment had been finalized quietly weeks ago pending assignment, was authorized to assume the bench to prevent a collapse of due process in a case where she was no longer a defendant but the injured party, and the air left the room in a collective gasp as Aaliyah adjusted her jacket, touched her cheek once where she'd been struck, and walked, not hurried, not triumphant, just inevitable, toward the judge's seat. And when she sat down, the perspective shifted in a way cameras could never fully capture, because power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just changes chairs. And the first thing Judge Monroe did, because that's what the clerk now called her, voice shaking, was order the immediate arrest of Officer Rourke for assault in the presence of the court, followed by Jensen for failure to intervene. And when Rourke sputtered about procedure and unions and misunderstandings, Aaliyah looked at him the same way she'd looked at Whitman moments earlier, with calm that had survived worse than him, and reminded the room that the law doesn't flinch just because someone's been used to leaning on it. And as cuffs snapped around the wrists that had struck her, the symbolism landed heavy and undeniable. But the story didn't end there, because over the next hours, still technically the same session, Aaliyah systematically reopened cases. Whitman had rushed through, appointing independent counsel, ordering body cam releases, and authorizing federal oversight, each decision slicing another thread that had held a corrupt routine together. And outside, the rain stopped. News vans arrived. Clips went viral out of order but unstoppable, and the slap, slowed down, analyzed, denied, then confirmed, became the spark that lit a broader reckoning. Because what the public learned in the following days was that Aaliyah had grown up watching her mother lose cases she should have won, had watched uncles take pleas they didn't deserve, and had promised herself not revenge but preparedness, a promise that led her through law school nights fueled by stubborn hope, through clerkships where she learned which rules mattered and which were used like stage props, through quiet meetings where she was told to wait her turn and smiled while counting exits. And when pundits asked if she'd planned the moment, she said no, but she'd planned for the system to eventually reveal itself. And when they asked how it felt to go from slapped to seated in seconds, she said, "The law doesn't move fast often, but when it does, it tends to remember who tried to silence it." And months later, when indictments rolled down like thunder and reforms followed that courtroom like a shadow, people would still replay that moment, still feel that sharp sound echo, not as humiliation but as a turning point, because America loves a redemption arc. But what it needs more are receipts. And on that rainy Monday, in a courtroom that expected compliance and got clarity instead, a black woman didn't just reclaim her dignity. She claimed the seat that had been used against her and reminded everyone watching that justice isn't blind. It's watchful, and it's waiting for the right person to sit down and make it speak.